Welcome to Tub Talks with Damon. My special guest today, all the way from the Bronx, is Ed García Conde, author, activist, leader, inspirational, mayor of Bronx. We're going to talk all about that in just a moment. But welcome to the Tub. Thank you for coming over here.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you, great to talk with you. Your leadership and just spiritual energy is very inspiring to me, and I think a lot of people that are watching this. And I can't wait to talk more about that. But before we get into that, Ed, I want to ask you, what do you like most about your body, about your physical body?
Well, that's an interesting question because, typically I focus on what I don't like.
Yes.
And
why
that's
is that?
Just, I think in general in just American culture and Western culture, we're supposed to look a certain way, we're supposed to dress a certain way, and when you don't fit that mold, you feel excluded, especially in the gay community. I mean, I hate to say it, but we've made so much progress in so many areas, but when it comes to excluding people based on how they look, we're still doing that. You still walk into a bar or a club, and if you don't fit that profile of the club, people are not going to interact with you or not want to interact with you. So,
do you feel that you received that?
I felt I did. There was a period of my life where actually I had gained a lot of weight because I was on prescription medication for anxiety. And I ended up gaining over 50 pounds. It's 60 pounds, and I was not physically myself. And all of a sudden I noticed what it felt like to be in a bigger body in these spaces, and it wasn't very welcoming.
What were the kind of reactions you would get?
Just general standoffishness, no one really wanting to interact with you, or hitting on you or anything like that. When I was thinner, no problem. But the minute you gain an extra pound, extra weight, all of a sudden, it wasn't the same.
So you noticed concretely a difference
Oh, yeah.
at different weights and sizes.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And I noticed when I started losing the weight again, when I got off the medication and I lost the weight again, the same people that would not interact with me all of a sudden wanted to hit on me, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
What do you ever just want to say fuck off to any of them?
I pretty much would not. I'm like, if you didn't like me then what's the point now?
Yeah.
So,
Wow. Okay.
But
So
yes, when we
size
focus on that,
and weight is still a very big issue, predominant in the gay community.
Yeah, I think so. I think no matter, we see all these cute videos about body positivity, and we see all these comments on social media where all these fit guys are like, yes, slay, you look amazing. But that same guy generally will not even give you 2 seconds.
So you're saying that if you're heavier, people who are heavier don't get that same kind of attention?
Oh, absolutely.
And
you'll get the body positivity, you'll get all the, encouragement, like all bodies matter and all that great stuff but the same people that usually say this, like those super uber fit guys, they won't, even though they're cheering you on, they won't give you 2 seconds.
Wow. Okay.
But,
So today then, so you lost a lot of that weight.
Yes.
And at this moment, what do you like about your body?
What do I like
enjoy
about
about your body?
I like my eyes. I've always liked my
Make sure
eyes.
everybody can see your eyes.
My big brown eyes.
Big brown eyes.
Generally my eyes, and I'm proud of my manhood. I'm gonna say, as a gay man, I like the size of my manhood. I'm comfortable
Your
with
penis.
that. My penis, exactly.
Beautiful.
And I think it's actually important to talk about that because it's interesting. I've had this conversation so many times. Women will post a picture in a tight top, and everyone's like, "Yay!" But if a guy does that in shorts, people are criticizing right away. They're like, "Oh, why are you doing that?" Oh, I'm like, "Well, one, we just like the woman, we can't hide it."
Meaning they can't have if they have a bulge.
Exactly.
Like their penis.
And then two,
Bulging, yeah.
why not be proud of it? You're not harming anyone.
Yeah. Okay. So have you ever had that happen where you posted a picture where there was a bulge and people were like,
There's always a comment like, "Hey, hide that," or I'm like, "Well, I don't see you saying that for a woman, when they're in a tight tank top or something." And hey, more power to them, but.
Okay, so if you post a picture and you have a bulge, people will be like, "Hide that thing."
There's always the thirst trap reactions, and everyone's like, yeah.
So a lot of them, yeah.
But then there's
but
there's always that crowd that's like, oh, You know, like I'm seeing too much of you.
Would you say that's a crowd specifically of a kind of person, or a specific age or gender, or who's that coming
I
from?
definitely say it's a generational thing.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's like
older, and women sometimes tend to be more that way also.
Interesting.
You know.
So, but younger people don't seem to have the same prohibitions or same reservations about celebrating the bulge, celebrating the penis.
No.
See, I think that too. And I think part of how we change that is doing like these interviews and just having really open, honest conversations about body positivity and showing what we got
Exactly.
in any way that feels comfortable.
And as a nudist, I've always been a nudist. So
Yeah.
like going to nude beaches and just walking around nude, like I've always felt comfortable. I've never felt shame in my body. And I thank my parents for that, because my parents, when I was a young kid, I was about 7 years old when my parents actually gave me a book that was geared for children about sex. And it was a picture book, essentially, with, you know, little words that, you know, you could understand in the first grade, explaining the process of reproduction, starting from chickens through mammals and then all the way up to humans. And my parents always told me, like, to never be ashamed of my body. Like, they were like, you know, like, because I remember one time, like, I do remember, I have this image of, like, my parents, I was taking a bath, and my parents saw, you know, like, I quickly hid myself because my mom walked in. She's like, that's nothing to be ashamed of, you know, and that's how I've lived my life ever since. You know, they were like, as long as you give, you know, like, as long as no one does anything to you that you don't want and that they shouldn't be doing, you should be fine with, you know, with your body, like comfortable with your body.
Okay.
So that's pretty progressive for Puerto Rican parents in the 70s and early 80s, because none of my friends, you know, when I grew up listening to my friends thinking they knew where kids came from. And meanwhile, I had the book that my parents gave me, and they actually taught me, you know, like.
So it was beyond just like the birds and the bees. Was it actually about humans connecting and loving? That is progressive. I shouldn't get anything like that.
It was
Wow.
And I don't have the book anymore, but I remember the image clearly, and it was basically just cut and paste type of figures on the book, and it was just a loving couple holding each other in bed with a blanket over them. Very innocent.
Wow.
And then explaining the biological process of what happens, explaining, you know, the sperm and the egg, and then the different stages and whatnot.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So you got this very progressive education from your parents about human sexuality and intimacy, and as well as celebrating your naked body.
Yes.
Yay, parents. Awesome. That's wonderful. So let's talk more about growing up and some of the causes and some of the passions that you've shared. You have said in interviews you were born in the Bronx, 1975, so in the middle of the 70s, at a time when the Bronx was being perceived as sort of this hotbed of racial violence, controversy, danger. Was it, I mean, let's talk about that. Was any of that real or accurate at the time?
It was pretty accurate. I mean, not so much the racial aspect of it, because there wasn't much racial violence going on. Unless you, well, I mean, if you call the landlords who happened to be white that were torching their own buildings where people of color lived, I mean, yes, that was racial violence. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay.
You know, if you want to, you know, that's, most people won't look at it that way, though.
Okay,
you know,
well, let's look at it that way.
It's very untraditional.
So there was and I think still is, the practice of landlords torching their own buildings, destroying their own buildings because residents had like rent stabilization, or they were trying to get out families.
Yeah, they actually, the main reason all this started was because there was actually a legal practice in the United States called redlining, where banks could legally draw a red line around the block if one black family lived there and deny loans to everybody, including white families. And they literally would call it Negro infiltration. And there are these maps of the Bronx where the red line would get bigger and bigger and bigger. And as these neighborhoods started to lose funding through mortgages and ability to refinance the properties, landlords felt pushed against, you know, between a rock and a hard place. They can't keep their properties maintained. So the only thing that they can think of is to torch the buildings to get, you know, cash out on the insurance and just flee. But in the process, thousands of families were displaced. 400,000 people in the South Bronx in the Bronx general were displaced the population from in the Bronx dropped drastically from a high of 1,475,000 in 1970. By 1980, about almost 400,000 were gone because all the buildings were torched. And then the ones that weren't torched, people were just fleeing because they didn't know if their building was going to be next. And that's where I grew up. That's where I was born. I was born in an area where I can walk with my mom and dad for blocks. Literally, I can walk 10 blocks and not see a soul, or maybe one person. And it was just rubble or empty buildings.
What was that like for you growing up, seeing that?
Well, it felt normal to me because that's all I knew. It felt normal up until high school.
How did they, at the time, how did your parents or how did anyone explain that to you, like why there were so many rubble lots around?
It wasn't talked about because it was something that we saw on a daily basis. We saw the fires happening almost every day, you know, whether it was a small fire or a big fire.
Were you ever afraid that that was going to happen to you?
You know, there was one time that it happened to the house next door to our building, and we had rushed out of our building because we didn't know if our building was going to catch fire. But as a child, you kind of like don't think about that. Your parents shelter you from that as best as they can, you know, from that fear. They try to give you as normal of a life as you can. So they would fill our days, you know, in the summer going to the park up Pelham Bay Park in the North Bronx where things were quiet and normal.
Yeah.
And get us out as much as possible. Yeah.
So this is really important because what I'm hearing you say is that so much of the quality of life and the struggle and some of the devastation and trauma people were going through if their houses were targeted was a direct result of redlining. Redlining is like government sanctioned racist saying this property is less than if people of black people are living in this, we're going in this neighbor or in this building, we're going to consider this block less than.
Yes.
And spotlight that and prevent and target it.
Yes.
In a way that then led landlords to feel that torching their own building and jeopardizing the lives and mental health of dozens and dozens of families was the only course of action.
Yeah. There's a lot of trauma that we don't talk about. There's a lot of PTSD. Ever so often when there actually is a fire and you smell the flames that have been extinguished and you can smell the wet wood and the flames that had just consumed that building, you get this flashback like 40 years ago when you were a little kid. Like immediately, like I smell that and I'm like transported to that era where that smell was just like every other block because you still sometimes would have smoldering lots, or you had, or it's just like a smell that just would not leave the neighborhood because there was just so much rubble.
Wow.
So it's just the smell you can't forget. I was speaking to a student yesterday who's doing her master's on gentrification in the South Bronx. I had an interview yesterday and...
I just want you to make sure you're speaking up.
I
want to make sure people can hear what you're saying.
I was speaking with a student who's doing her master's on gentrification in the South Bronx, and her mother is my age, and she was telling me, she's like, my mom told me about all of that, like the smells and the fires and the PTSD that you have from this. Personally, I don't think I have PTSD in the traditional sense, but sometimes things do hit me, like the pandemic, for example. When the pandemic hit, the Bronx was the epicenter for the pandemic in New York City, especially in the beginning, and not just the city, but in the country. And seeing the empty streets again, no one walking around because everybody was indoors, sort of like transported me back to 40 years prior when I was a little kid, walking the streets again with no one around. It was not a comfortable feeling.
So early pandemic, and I hope people know, but maybe they know that the Bronx was hit very early on as an epicenter of COVID.
Yeah.
And you're saying that walking around, not seeing people, seeing storefronts closed was really a reminder of early childhood. And I imagine for other people living in the neighborhood, it had the same eerie memory to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how are you doing now with that?
I think I'm okay overall, like a little better. I mean, it's just frustrated because one of the reasons that the Bronx was the epicenter for the COVID pandemic, all goes back again to racism. It goes back to redlining. It goes back to all these policies, the institutional racism that has been built into New York City and the fabric of our neighborhoods, the disinvestment that has happened, no matter how many times we tell the city that we don't want another warehouse, with trucks in our neighborhood. Case in point, Fresh Direct used to be here in Queens, over in Queens, Long Island City. We fought that move to the South Bronx, but we were told that we're getting jobs, so it should be okay. And that we should accept, the thousands of trucks that were going to flood our neighborhoods, even though we have 9 times the rate of asthma, the national rate of asthma, and we have 15 times the hospitalization rate in New York City for asthma. But we were told that because we're getting jobs, we should swallow the trucks that are coming into our neighborhoods that are going to kill us. So we already knew that because our population also has the highest rates of diabetes in the city, the highest rates of asthma, highest rates of heart disease, we already knew that we were going to get hit hard. We just knew it because at that point, what we did know about COVID was that anyone that had a comorbidity was at a greater risk, especially of those diseases. And in the Bronx, it wasn't just the comorbidity of like 2 diseases. A lot of people have 3 or more of these high-risk diseases. And sure enough, the fatality for COVID in the Bronx was so much higher than it was for Manhattan. It was literally a tale of 2 cities. You crossed the bridge and people weren't dying. People also weren't caring as much in Manhattan about protecting themselves the way they were in the Bronx. You saw people masking up, but exactly 2 years ago yesterday, I was sort of the center of controversy because I documented people at the Christopher Street Pier. Everyone was maskless. It was all packed. This was before we knew anything. We were just told to, socially, remain socially distant, and no enforcement in sight. But in the Bronx and communities of color, we had over enforcement to the point that there were police officers who beat people for not wearing masks because they were told to wear masks.
So enforcement, you're talking about mass enforcement
exactly.
in the spring of 2020.
Yeah, in public spaces.
So in white, rich, Christopher, West Village, that was never a thing. But
Never
in the Bronx, that was being enforced specifically against people of color.
Oh, our parks were actually closed in some areas. We weren't allowed to go to our own parks, even though we knew that that's where we should be, outside. We had tons of police barricading some of the parks, so we couldn't access. Playgrounds were cut off. Playgrounds in Manhattan, some of them were cut off, but usually more further north of 96th Street. But below 96th Street, not the same enforcement. So, it's a lot.
So we're talking about an area, as you said, before COVID, statistically was at higher risk for diabetes, for asthma, for heart disease.
Cancer.
Also
HIV. It's the highest rates of HIV. So, everything you can think of that they said that COVID was going to affect people more, people had.
Why are these rates higher in the Bronx?
Well, we don't have access to healthy food, even though we have the Hunts Point Terminal Market, which serves the Northeast, and a lot of the fresh produce grows through the South Bronx. It doesn't really reach the people who live in the neighborhood because they're too expensive for people. People in the South Bronx, they can't afford to shop at Whole Foods. They can't necessarily afford to shop at Trader Joe's. You have Bloomberg, who had a great idea about expanding what he called it was a fresh program to expand access to healthy foods in low-income neighborhoods and food deserts. But he was only incentivizing supermarkets. And the cornerstone and foundation of the neighborhoods in the Bronx and neighborhoods of color are bodegas. They're not giant supermarkets. So these supermarkets were getting tons of tax breaks, and meanwhile the bodega, where the majority of people do their shopping, weren't getting these tax breaks. They weren't getting the relief that they needed so that they could offer healthier foods for residents. There's always the argument that, well, you can offer it, but you can't force the person to eat it. But if that's all that they start seeing everywhere, they might say, hey, let me try that out. It's all curiosity. It's all breaking down. It's all education. But
so nutritional food desert.
Nutritional food desert, and then poverty.
Big contribution.
Yeah, and then poverty.
Yeah.
The Bronx being the poorest congressional. We have the poorest congressional district in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
families are on public assistance, over 50%, you're going to want to make that dollar go far when you're trying to feed your family. Yes. And the only option to do that is generally fast food or junk food. Nothing that's really healthy, because again, why is eating healthy expensive? You know, we can cure a lot of the issues that we have, hypertension and diabetes alone. Like, we can eradicate those numbers if we had access to healthy eating, instead of constantly seeing a fast food restaurant open like McDonald's or a Wingstop or fried chicken, you know, a juice generation, so to speak, or a Just Salad or something, or the equivalent in the neighborhood. Not necessarily those corporate chains, but support, because there are tons of people that want to do the work, but they don't have the access to the capital, and that's always the problem, that they don't have the access to capital so they can support their own neighborhoods.
Do you feel like there's a direct line between the redlining of the 70s and prior that was so devastating and the poverty that is seen today? Absolutely,
because people couldn't become homeowners the way, I mean, wealth in this country is through real estate. This is how power is transferred from, you know, generation to generation in families. We didn't have that luxury because we couldn't get the loans to buy the property. And when finally the properties were available to buy and redlining was gone, because it's never gone, it's still there, it's, you know, in its own ways. We couldn't buy the properties anymore because speculation was driving prices up. Speculation with real estate prices. It's a practice that happens when people start naming the next it neighborhood.
Oh.
So someone wants to buy property in that neighborhood before it goes really high, and they'll buy it. You know, let's say the property is really worth $200,000. But they want to get in before it really climbs up high, and they're like, I'm going to pay $250, you know, cash. Here's all cash transaction. Even though it's not worth it, and a bank would not approve a loan, but they have the cash to buy it all cash, that artificially starts inflating the prices. And that happened in the Bronx, and that's what's happening now in the Bronx.
So that people with means, people of privilege, will zero in on property, not because they necessarily want to live there or care about the community or its wellness, but because of the investment opportunity that they perceive.
Absolutely.
And so they'll zero in, they'll get these properties, they'll drive the property rates high, which therefore reinforce the systemic poverty that you're describing. That lends itself to food deserts, lower health quality of life. So it really becomes a cycle within a cycle within a cycle, and it's still happening today.
Now it's happening with gentrification, you know.
So let's talk about gentrification. I want to hear more about, so what is for you, what does that word mean?
Well, gentrification in its simplest terms is the displacement of lower income families, working class families with a higher income family. And around the world you see this happening in countries, but in America we have the component of race, which makes it uncomfortable for people to talk about, because people don't like talking about race. People don't want to talk about racism. They deny that they have privilege. They deny that there's so many denials that I see on a daily basis.
Why is that denial?
Well,
so prevalent?
I wish I knew why the denial, but I think they feel more comfortable justifying their existence of privilege by saying that they don't have it than acknowledging it. It's more because then all of a sudden they feel, well, what can I do about it? It's not like you have to, like, I don't want half of your fortune or anything, but there are steps that you can do to acknowledge your privilege.
Such as?
You know, for example, when you move into a neighborhood that's known to be gentrifying, stop calling for Starbucks. Stop calling for the national chains. Go to your local bodega and, you know, get that coffee from them, which is much cheaper and much better usually.
Totally.
And if they don't have something that, you know, that, like, if there's something that you want, speak to the bodega owner, and they might start carrying it for you because they don't want to lose your business, because they know that by getting you that one thing, you're liable to buy something else from them, you know, and start using them more, you know. So there's always a clamor in neighborhoods, you know, for new amenities. And while we all want the amenities, speak to the people who've lived there all their lives and see what they want and see how you can help them before you impose what you want in a neighborhood that you're coming to essentially colonize.
So gentrification and colonization have a lot in common? Are they exactly the same thing, or
pretty
much the overlap?
Pretty much there's an overlap. It's one and the same almost. It's like a Venn diagram, like with little space in between.
So you have been discussing this in terms of your experience of living in the Bronx for the majority of your life,
Yes.
Loving this community, really being passionate about this community, and seeing these changes. So what would you do? So let's say, they come to you and they're like, hey, mayor, you're seen as very much a leader, kind of the mayor in parts of the Bronx. And they're like, so if Eric Adams' cabinet says, what's your solution? What would you say?
Stop rezoning our neighborhoods.
Say more. What does that mean?
Right now, for example, all the gentrification that's happening in the South Bronx is a result of a rezoning that was done under Bloomberg in 2009 for a large area that was mostly industrial.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of warehouses, and there was a need for more residential housing. The warehouses were under, I believe it was like most of them were under 50% usage. They were just vacant, sitting there. So you want to change this, but up until that point, you could only construct or allow businesses in there. In order to construct residential, you would have to rezone the lots or the neighborhood to allow for construction of residential buildings. So in 2009, that was done in the neighborhood. Back then, no one was really worried because the eyes weren't focused on the Bronx yet. Even though I saw it and a lot of my friends, we knew it was going to come and it was going to happen.
So in 2009, the Bronx was not yet perceived as this financial opportunity that outsiders would wish to invest in.
They were trying to make it happen. They were,
Who's that?
The real estate interests. Barbara Corcoran was one of them. She was the one who kept saying that the South Bronx is the next frontier.
So the real estate corporations were
literally
spotting those old warehouses as financial.
Literally saying that the next, this is the next frontier. It's pretty derogatory. Frontier sort of. When you hear that word, you think of empty land that no one owns or something, or big wilderness. And it's not a wilderness.
Right.
It's a neighborhood with historical significance to the people who live there, and the people not only who lived there, but the people who endured over half a century of neglect from the city and had to fend for themselves for services because the city was not providing the services that they needed. So to be classified as the next frontier and to just be seen as disposable, because let's be for real, it's just disposable. Someone can buy your building and say, hey, we're going to evict everyone and we want to build a high-rise because we want profit. So
I'm just listening and processing what you're saying, because to think about human life as disposable is already heart-wrenching, but to be aware, I'm a New Yorker and I'm not aware of a lot of this. I'm probably considered a gentrifier here in Williamsburg. We could talk about that.
Yeah.
But just to think about living in the Bronx, growing up in the Bronx, loving the Bronx, the community, your family, all the people you have ties to, being considered disposable in this new frontier just absolutely breaks my heart and pisses me off.
Yeah. And you mentioned Eric Adams, but Eric Adams is
he at all sensitive to any of these issues?
Absolutely
in your opinion?
not. He's
Was de Blasio?
Nah, he pretended to be.
Mm-hmm.
De Blasio was the worst of all because he pretended to be. At least Bloomberg and
Mm-hmm.
Giuliani, we knew where we stood.
Uh-huh.
De Blasio came in painting himself as the savior that he wasn't, and he was basically Bloomberg 2.0 when it came with the rezonings, trying to force rezonings into our communities. His last major rezoning was right above Yankee Stadium, a 92 block area that stretched along the number 4 train line, which was mostly single-story and 2-story warehouses and automotive businesses that were owned mostly by immigrants of color, mostly, whether they were like Jamaican or from the Caribbean. These were middle-class businesses, and now that the rezoning happened, they're starting to be evicted. There's a block right now where not 1, not 2, but 3 buildings went up on either side of the train, where these businesses used to exist that used to provide, livelihood for many families, and these were good-paying jobs. Automotive jobs are good-paying jobs, and we're losing that to real estate interest, and this is thanks to de Blasio.
Okay, so back to the question: if anyone if anyone in politics in New York City, which I hope they do, but I guess I'm not too hopeful now. But if anyone said to you, so what would you do? What would be the solution? How do we preserve what's left of the quality of life and community in the Bronx? You would say, stop doing this rezoning shit.
Yes.
Okay, and what else?
And we need more pathways to home ownership. We need affordable home ownership. We need ways that we can allow residents to organize in a building and say, hey, we want to buy this building from our landlord, turn it into a co-op, have the proper investment behind it so people can become homeowners. Home ownership is the only way out of being displaced, because once you own the property, then you get to dictate what's going to happen. And if we don't have those opportunities, then we're just going to continue the cycle over and over again. And the next neighborhood we get pushed into, what's going to happen there? It's going to happen again 20, 30 years down the road, because the city's going to keep expanding or whatever, everybody wants to be in the next neighborhood.
Right.
It's funny you mentioned Williamsburg. When I got off the train, I don't come here too often, but when I do, I always notice vestiges of the old neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And outside your building, and I noticed the Pentecostal church. Mm-hmm. And then I see an old man walking, Latino, singing a song in Spanish, and I'm like, yeah, that's what this neighborhood was, like 50 years ago, Polish and Puerto Rican, neighborhood, and Hasidic Jews living together. It was, like a working class neighborhood.
Yeah.
And as cute and as fun as Williamsburg is, it doesn't have that vibe anymore. Even the little cute shops that are owned, that are mom and pop and shops owned, you can't replace that quality of a multi-generational business that used to exist there, that fed a whole family.
So I've seen that. So I've been here in this building, in this tub, for 14 years, and definitely seen that change. And I was so acutely aware, well, I'm part of that change. Like, I moved here, I'm a white guy, and bought this apartment in 2008 at a time when this neighborhood was starting to rapidly gentrify. Certainly down in Bedford was already happening. We're a little away from that, but it's already happened. So it's that both and. I'm acutely aware of that and concerned about that, and acutely aware that I am actively part of that problem.
Yeah.
What do I do? What can I do to, you kind of already mentioned this before, but what, as a privileged white guy who loves this neighborhood, what can I do to help maintain the quality and integrity of this community?
Definitely, I would connect with the people who've been here for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
the existing families, the existing businesses, seek them out, try to support them better, find the organizations that have been doing the groundwork in Williamsburg that have been fighting against gentrification. That's usually the best resource, is find that activist group, because they're going to know everything in the neighborhood. They're going to know the beat, the pulse. They can give you the history. They can send you to these places, where you can use your privilege for the greater good.
Okay. And I say that because, this is my truth, but I also know that people watching this are in similar areas in Los Angeles, in Seattle, in Chicago, New York, parts of Oregon, San Francisco. A lot of us have been part of this problem. And, like you said earlier, I want us to be able to talk about this problem. I recognize the privilege that's inherent in my position. And instead of shying away from that, saying, okay, well, what, if anything, can I do about that? What, if anything, can anyone do right now to help preserve quality of life and mental health and physical health in the Bronx?
Oof. We definitely need more investment. We need dollars in mental health. For mental health facilities and services, it's desperately needed, because the Bronx still has the stigma of accessing mental health care. If you do that, you're automatically labeled as crazy. It's something that's prevalent in low-income communities of color. It's just a stigma that's so hard to shake. So the first thing that we can do is talk about it. Be open about it. That's why I went publicly through my anxiety. Like, I shared it with the world when I had gained the weight on Paxil to control my anxiety, which I never had. And when I started getting off of the Paxil, my panic and anxiety came back. So I decided to be open on social media about my journey and my subsequent addiction to Klonopin, because you needed.
You were taking Klonopin
after I got off the Paxil.
Oh.
So it's almost the only way to get off of Paxil or any of those drugs safely, because you're going to get hit with a shitstorm of panic and anxiety. You know, once you're tapered off. I tapered off the right way, although I didn't do it under the guidance of a psychiatrist. But I did do it the right way, as far as, you know, tapering off weekly, like lowering the dose, you know, because you can't do it all of a sudden. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I decided to be public about my journey. I wrote about it in my blog. I wrote about it on Facebook and Twitter. And immediately, within days, I had hundreds of messages publicly posted saying, "Thank you, I felt like I was the only one." I was getting hundreds of messages privately. I can't post this publicly, but I wanted to let you know that I no longer feel alone. And I started crying because I thought I was alone and nobody would understand what I did. So from then on, I realized the power of being open about your mental health problems. If you feel comfortable, you know, it's not for everyone. It's not for the faint of heart, because you do get some pushback too, like, "Oh, you're oversharing." No, I'm not oversharing, because I know right now, this day, I know that there are about 1 or 2 lives that may have been saved because of me being open about my journey. So if anything that we can do in the Bronx right now is try to find that courage to open up about it. You don't have to open up like I did to the literal world, but start with someone that you know, that you feel you can trust. And you're going to be surprised. I think, you know, people are going to be surprised that they can, you know, be open about it. And you're going to feel that relief, like that mountain lifted off your shoulders. And all of a sudden you feel uplifted by a mountain of your community.
It's beautiful. Now, did I hear you say that you were misdiagnosed?
No, I wasn't misdiagnosed.
Okay.
In 2007, I started getting severe panic attacks out of nowhere. It happened a few months after my grandmother passed away. And eventually made the correlation that, you know, must have been that. Because actually, it started a month before she passed, but I didn't recognize it as that. But it got so bad I could not work at the office anymore. I was getting crippling panic attacks where I was just trembling and I couldn't function. I had to go to the ER because I thought I was dying, like left and right, until I finally had to get medicated to control them. But it had the effect of me gaining the weight. All of a sudden I went from usually, you know, like my usual weight of 150, 155, 160 max, I ballooned up to 220 pounds and turned pre-diabetic. I was already hypertensive to begin with, minor. My hypertension was out of control. I even got fatty liver. And when I realized what the medication was doing to me, and I was just existing on the medication, I wasn't actively seeking help with a therapist.
I was going to ask you that next, yeah.
Because I had exhausted that to a degree. And
Meaning what?
Meaning, like, I felt like I had exhausted it. The therapist eventually was just like, "You just need to go on medication." Didn't really help push me along, you know, to equip me with the tools to deal with my anxiety and my panic attacks. So I lived about 6 years on Paxil, completely unhealthy.
So without any other therapy or support, it was just like Paxil?
Yeah, Paxil.
Okay.
That's it. Just get my refill and take it, and refill and take it, and refill and take it. Until I looked at myself in the mirror one day and I'm like, "Who are you?" And my best friend was like, "You're not even yourself. It's not the physical, but you're not even acting like yourself."
They missed the light.
Yeah. Okay. Literally, that's what they told me.
Yeah.
And
okay.
I never noticed that. I thought I was still the same Ed. And
what did it feel like to hear someone say that to you, that they kind of weren't seeing you in you?
I was resistant at first. I was like, "You're nuts. Like, I'm me. I haven't changed. I'm still the happy-go-lucky fun guy." Like, that's how I felt. But it wasn't until I started getting off the meds and I started feeling different and more energetic and I started losing the weight that people started telling me to, like, your light is back. And when they said that, like, I broke down. I started crying because I'm like, I felt like I was like in this dark forest for so long, and like my essence was gone and snatched away. And I'm not saying that the medication is evil, like I want to get that out there. Medication, like if you need it, by all means take it. Just understand the side effects and speak with your mental health practitioner. I will never downplay, how it helped me, because it did help me.
Yeah.
And
I personally would recommend that people have some sort of adjacent therapy, cognitive behavioral or therapy process adjacent to medication.
That was my big mistake. But through the grace of therapy, right in my neighborhood, because one of the things that I believe, like I told you, I seek within my neighborhood. If I can't find it in my neighborhood, then I'll go elsewhere. So lo and behold, there was a psychotherapy clinic 2 blocks from my house, and I went in. It was a little hard at first because, all your neighbors see you walking into this place, and it's, we have stigmas attached to the word psychotherapy and all that. But eventually I just got over it, and I had one amazing therapist, and things were working. Then she left, and I landed with another therapist for 1 month, and she left, and I'm like, I need stability. When she told me, the day she told me that she had left, I had spotted this guy who my gaydar went off, and I'm like, that's a gay therapist. Why am I not with him? Because there are issues that are related to my anxiety that I think would be better dealt with another gay therapist. And so when she said she was leaving, I'm like, I described the guy without using gay. I'm like, she's like, oh, that's so and so. I'll see if he can take you on because I know he has a full caseload. I'm like, I have to be with him because you're my second therapist, in a short span, and sure enough, we linked up, and it was the best 2 years. And because of him, through the work that we did together and how we were able to work, I was able to beat my addiction to Klonopin. I am now 4 years and 1 month Klonopin free.
Okay.
So, that's the thing that they don't tell you about Klonopin. Even though you know that it's addicting, they hand it out like candy. The psychiatrist. And I always looked for the sweet relief of that pill whenever I was just, rather than going through the emotion and trying to relax myself and not believing in myself, that I had the power to control, if not all, but most of my panic attacks. And I would grab that blue pill and cut it in half and just savor it.
So what do you do now for anxiety and panic?
Well, the good thing is that I don't get them as much anymore.
How come?
I really think it's the work that we did in therapy. RBT method. I forget. I think that's the method.
Rational emotive behavioral therapy.
Yes. So we did so many. We did so many exercises.
Yeah.
The catastrophe scales.
Yes.
And he would tell me okay, when you're having a panic attack, what do you feel? I'm like, where's that? I'm like, at 100. And he's like, well, what can be worse than that? I'm like, so we kept doing these exercises. So now it's just like, I've basically trained my mind that what I'm going through, there's something out there that's far worse than what I'm going through right now. And that I've been able to get over it so many times that I'm going to get over this one too, even if it's going to be nasty and not feeling all so great. And that's okay. I had to not beat myself up for getting a panic attack, because that was also something that I was doing. I would get so frustrated. So I think that's what we have to do sometimes, is step back and relish it. Accept it for its messiness. Just accept it. It's the human condition. We're human. We're not robots where we can program our mind to all of a sudden dump in another direction if we don't like what we're feeling. We have to just let it wash over us.
It's amazing. I always say mind is like a muscle. Our synapses are like muscles. So when you first start exercising those synapses to guard from panic, or to make that 100 come down to even like a 98.
Yeah.
But that's the beginning of your mind working. Now, people go to a gym, they've got no problem saying, okay, I'm going to start with light weights and then move to heavy weights. But when we come to the mind, people sometimes say, oh, I can't do it. It's like, you can do it. I think that's a brilliant example that the more we practice, the more reps we do, the more we practice working with our minds, the stronger and more reliable our minds get in terms of managing anxiety and panic. And not to, as you said, not to get down on yourself for feeling what you feel.
Yeah.
You have been such a role model and example of living your truth. And as you've already heard, you've saved lives by being honest and open with people about your journey, about your struggles. I just also want to acknowledge that another thing you've inspired people to do is to learn about living with HIV. Yes. You mentioned earlier HIV rates being quite high in the Bronx, and you have been living that truth for well over 2 decades now. Can you say a little more about that journey?
Well, I was diagnosed, it's going to be, wow, thinking about it, it's 23 years.
Yeah. And that was right around the time treatment medications started to be implemented, though they were still pretty rough going at the beginning there.
I started, it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, where growing up gay in the 80s and 90s, the only thing that you were taught is that you're gonna get AIDS and die. In the hood, in the South Bronx, being another epicenter of HIV, and I'm not gonna even sugarcoat it, it was AIDS. It wasn't HIV, it was AIDS. It was full-blown AIDS. It was full-blown people wasting away in the streets, along with the crack epidemic and heroin, which never went away in the Bronx. It was prevalent back then. So you have all these things, and you sort of saw that as like, well, you're not gonna escape this, it's gonna happen. I remember when I was diagnosed, I cried. The first day I cried, but then I didn't cry anymore. I was like, okay, what do I do next? It wasn't so easy for my family, because my best friend betrayed my confidence and decided to tell my parents. Well, my mother, because she felt that if something happened to me, that my parents should know, and I was like, that wasn't for you. So it made, when I was diagnosed around the time that I came out to my parents, so it was a lot happening. I came out twice. Most people come out once. I came out twice. I came out as a gay man, and I came out as an HIV positive gay man. A statistic, a cliche. Almost, it felt like, because that's what we were told that was going to happen. So I sought treatment. I had the mindset back then that, well, where can I get the most mutual benefit? Meaning, can I be a part of a study? So I immediately enrolled in a study in NYU in 1998. Where I had access to other meds. I had access to, oh my God, I'm trying to remember the name now. Sestiva, was it? The brain one?
That was...
Yes. Yes. So I had access to...
No, that was what we called the psychotic drug in the 90s, yeah.
So...
Get some water, keep up.
Go for it. I started with 21 pills a day. Crixaban, Sestiva, and Camomile. And every 8 hours.
So it was like 7 pills every 8 hours. They had to be taken.
And a constant state of nausea, of stomach unease, of stomach issues, and the Sestiva. You had to learn when to take it, because if you took it during the day, your whole day, the middle of the day was going to be fucked up because you would start hallucinating sometimes. Yes. Every step you took, you felt like you were in a bouncy house almost. I had to be sent home several times from work because I couldn't function. And I remember once my mother checking in on me and I was hallucinating. I saw something completely different. It was just really bad. So I say this to say that I take 1 pill now. One pill.
You went from 21 to 1.
21 to 1. And I think of everyone who died for that unnecessarily too, because of our government, because of the inaction of the Republicans and the Reagan administration and Democrats too. I mean, it was pretty much everyone was at fault because it was a gay issue. And as long as it wasn't impacting the rest of the community, then who cares about funding? It's not an issue. And now I have the audacity of hope that not only could there be a vaccine, but there could be a cure in my lifetime. I didn't have that back then. I was fortunate, like you mentioned, it was just when the therapies were coming out, to be at that precipice, like at that line. And I could have gone either way, because I know people who were positive at that time who got on the meds and still perished.
Me too, yeah.
It was too late for them.
Yeah.
And that could have been me.
Yeah.
So I don't take that for granted. But earlier, you mentioned about your work in prep and you worked about you and you. You equals you. You equals you is something that is relatively new for the mainstream, but it's something that the research nurse at NYU, she taught me this about 15 years ago.
Interesting. So this idea that
actually longer than 15 years ago.
Right. The information has been around for a very long time. There was actually a Swiss statement that was drafted in 2007 that outlined this. But that knowledge, so you were fortunate to be told that when you're undetectable, you cannot transmit HIV to others.
You know, and she was always very candid with me.
Wow.
I loved her because, we learned a lot. She learned a lot from the data that we were providing with our bodies and our day-to-day. And she in turn felt that it was okay to share things with us that maybe someone else might not. You know, she shared it with me because she knew I knew what to do.
Someone else meaning doctors?
Yeah, and she knew what I knew. She knew that I would know what to do with the information. Yeah. But she explicitly told me that then. She said, one of the reasons we don't share this also right now is because a lot of education has to go into this, and they felt the general consensus was that they didn't feel that people were ready, and they think that people would be reckless and infection rates might go higher because then people would not want to be compliant. She didn't necessarily agree with that. She just agreed, she's like, why send someone into a panic because they had unprotected sex with someone who was positive but undetectable, and now that person is thinking that they're gonna, they have a death sentence on them.
So, I think about what we were saying before about colonialism and, in the HIV world, the paternalism that's inherent. And that's what I know. I'm I love these bathtubs, but you're a little crap. That idea that you could not handle the truth.
Yeah.
That you could not, as a person living with HIV, be trusted with the medicine and the science that proved that undetectable was untransmittable 15 years ago.
Correct. That
doctors told people not to tell people.
Yeah.
And this is why, those of us who work in this field get really angry and, are very appreciative to Bruce Richmond and many of the guests I've had on the show who have outlined the science, the data, and the medical resistance to U equals U science. So you were given that message, by a really, sounds like wonderful healthcare professional, that you have a right to know your body. You have a right to understand the implications of so what was that like to learn that 15 years ago, that when you were undetectable, you could not transmit HIV to others? What did that feel like?
It felt liberating, but most importantly, it lifted another weight off your shoulders because you're taught that your body's a weapon when you're positive, when you're HIV positive. I mean, there are laws still in this country that see it as such and treat you as such if another person was, quote unquote, infected. Yeah. To use the dirty word.
That you are a vector of, that your body is a vector of infection.
So to feel that you're not like this weapon of mass destruction walking around was a good feeling, because I was always very adherent, except twice in my life where it was when the pills were still somewhat toxic. Well, I mean, they still are to a degree, but I was still feeling like the constant headaches or the uneasiness. So I did like 2 drug holidays where I went completely, off treatment for months at a time. And interestingly enough, my numbers didn't really increase that much. And, my research doctor, I was still seeing, I saw her for 15 years because it turned into a longitudinal study. And she was always impressed by when those 2 times that I did the holidays, she's like, your numbers never increased that much. So, I'm like, okay, so I felt good because I'm providing data again. My body, like I'm taking a bad and turning it into something positive for future generations. In activism, and I want to point this out, because it dawned on this actually happened to me a few weeks ago. I was on Randall's Island and I saw 2 high school boys, 15 years old maybe, and one of them had his head lovingly on the other one's chest and the other one stroking his hair, surrounded by 2 or 3 dozen of their classmates. And I got teary-eyed because I'm like, that never could happen when I was a kid. And immediately the first thought that I had as activists, we often fight for things that we might not see for ourselves. We have to remember that we're fighting for a better tomorrow for the next generation. If we get to see some of those things and experience them, that is amazing. But to always remember that, because of the way things work and how slowly things work, we're doing this for someone else.
Wow. So what, that almost brings us completely full circle, because as we're talking, I'm thinking about, you have shared so many subjects, so many struggles, so many things you have lived through, still living through in this world. The systemic racism and red zoning and the implications of that in the Bronx today, the implications, the human suffering and trauma that's happening today as we're speaking, that you, in this community, you love so much. We've talked about mental health issues and body issues. And yet when we meet and when we talk, I feel like there is a light. I feel like there is a positivity. You still, when I see you doing interviews or videos, there's a smile. There's a gentleness to you. How? I guess sometimes people might think like, wow, someone who's been through all these things in life would be hardened and mean and angry and cynical. I don't see it that way.
Yeah.
Is that...
First and foremost, I have amazing parents.
Shout out to the parents.
Where, again, statistically, parents of my generation were shunning their gay kids. My parents weren't. They were embracing me. When I came out to my dad, his words were, he started crying. He says, I don't understand it, but you're my son and I love you no matter what, and I will always love you. And that's the kind of love that's carried me with my parents. So, secondly, my friends and my chosen family, besides my family, and their love and their support. Without a support network, it's hard to get by in life. And it's even harder to get by when you're dealing with so many things. So it's kudos to everyone that's in my orbit, that I've chosen to have in my orbit, that has been able to be there for me. I think that's important. And the other part is just me, who I've always been. I've always been this happy-go-lucky kid. I'm just like my 2 grandfathers. They both were known as mayors. And always chatting with everyone and strangers and getting to know people. I love life. I love meeting new people. I'm a huge extrovert. Who has introvert qualities, but my life. I like to see people happy. I like to you've seen my Facebook posts. I joke around constantly, and it could be the most darkest of days in the news, but I try to cheer people up with the most ridiculous asinine thing. Because for one moment you're laughing, and that attitude might carry out through the rest of your day, which is why I try to do them in the mornings. Just in case something hits you, But my mother always jokes. She's like, you're nuts. Like your Facebook is just a hot mess. I'm like, yeah, but look how many people are laughing and enjoying it. I'm like, I'm actually, I mentioned that I had people write me about coming out with my anxiety. I've had people write me about like my silly, goofy posts and saying that they don't know how they would get through their day if they didn't see like me shit posting something. So it's just, there's a Buddhist saying about how, like the brightness of a candle won't be diminished if you light another candle, it just expands.
Yes.
And that's how I like to live my life, like share my happiness, share my joys. I'm going to share my pain, but I'm going to look within that pain. There's going to be something positive that I'm going to find, and even when there isn't, I'll try to squeeze something out. My boyfriend is someone who always, whenever I share something that seems sad, he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, why? I question him. I'm like, I'm not sad. I'm okay. So I try to help people retrain their reactions to when someone says something, because just because you say something that might be sad, the immediate reaction is like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. There are other things that we can say.
Yeah. What, such as?
Well, instead of saying I'm so sorry, you can say, oh, that sucks. Like that's, I think, much different than saying I'm sorry, because then all of a sudden I think you're feeling like kind of weird because that person is feeling sorry. Like, why is that person?
And then if you're a caretaker, now you have to take care of the other person. Yeah.
Empath.
Yeah.
And the caretaker, yes.
Yeah.
The caretakers have to take care of themselves.
Yep.
That's something that I learned also on this journey with activism. We neglect ourselves. We are masters at neglecting ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when people say, are you okay? We're quick to say, yeah, because you don't want to burden that person.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to identify people in your circle that you're comfortable with saying, time out, uncle.
Mm-hmm. Have those people.
I need. And the other big thing that activists have to learn how to say, which I learned the hard way, is no. No, I cannot do this. No. You can't take on everything. And that is something I learned the hard way.
Yeah. It's a balance.
Yeah, it's a balance.
It's a constant balance, because there's never a set point at which you're like, okay, I'm perfectly balanced, and I know my yes, and I know my no. For me, there's a constant tight wire. Especially now that things are coming back. There's socializing again, there's opening up, there's things I want to do, and sometimes not compatible with all the other agreements I've made. So I'm learning that. You mentioned the mayor. Have you ever thought about running for politics or holding a political position?
I have. I'm constantly being asked when I'm going to run for office in the Bronx for city council. I've thought about it, but I feel like the most power that I have is like riling up the base and holding elected officials accountable through my writings and relationships with them, because I have a lot of relationships with elected officials that I will text. I'm like, hey, this is going on. Can you check it out, please? And a few minutes later, got it on it, because they know I'm a loudmouth and they know I will be obnoxious about it, and they don't want to, have something in their district that is not favorable to them. So as much as I would love to possibly be in office, I still think that just being an everyday citizen is more effective. Because once you're in there, you're up against a whole different machine. Yep. And I don't play nice.
That's hard for me to believe.
When it comes to politics, not with politicians.
Okay.
I there are some things that I will not compromise. Right. And too many of our elected officials compromise.
Yeah, well, you have integrity.
Yeah.
You stay true to your values, which I agree. Sometimes politicians, for various reasons, don't do. So, okay, so politics probably not in your future.
No, but I will support the right candidate that I feel is right for my community.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And for the record, it was not Eric Adams.
Who was it?
Believe it or not, there was no one in this election that I felt was qualified for me. So I voted. I did vote.
We had like 10 candidates. None of them really were representing the Bronx's wellness.
No. Eric Adams. Well, there was Diana. What's her name?
I can't remember. There were 10 of them.
She was so good, and I can't remember. She was the only one that I was actually considering. But Eric Adams, one of the questions you asked, what can you do as a gentrifier in a community?
Yeah.
Stop calling the police for everything.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
The police aren't problem solvers for a lot of things. Do they have their place? A lot of my activist friends would disagree with me when I say yes, they do have their place for certain situations.
Mm-hmm.
But not everything is a police matter.
Yeah.
A noise complaint, that's not... Try to work it out with your neighbor, your landlord, or whatnot. I mean, there are situations you're going to need it, but we've already seen what happens when, especially a white person calls the cops on someone of color.
Yes. Often violence, trauma, death. Thank you.
Yeah, so.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking this time. Let's end this interview with a question that you get asked a lot. Let's talk about all the things that you would like people to know about the Bronx. Okay, wait, before we get to that, is it Bronx or the Bronx? I'm a California person, so what do I say?
It's the Bronx.
The Bronx,
yes.
Okay. You often talk about the beauty, the wonderful qualities that are worth savoring and visiting and supporting in the Bronx. Let's talk about that.
Sure. If you want to see what, I hate to say this, but what the real New York still looks like, come to the Bronx. You're going to see a slice of New York that doesn't exist anymore in a lot of the boroughs. We're not as friendly or as violent as you might think we are because of the media. That's one of the reasons I started writing about the Bronx, is because the media was constantly only talking about the Bronx in a negative light.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sick and tired of that. And every time I would Google the Bronx in the early 2000s, I got pictures of the Bronx in the 70s that were burnt out. And that's the image that's burned in everyone's mind, and not just in America, but around the world. In Paris, in France, there's a term when something kind of like goes to shit, they just say, c'est le Bronx.
Wow.
It's the Bronx.
Shit.
And as far as Australia, in bad neighborhoods or something that happens, there are elected officials that say, oh my God, our neighborhood is turning into the Bronx. Or this isn't the Bronx, we should have let it turn into the... And I get these alerts constantly because this is what I do for a living.
So you get like a Google alert when people say that.
When they talk about the Bronx.
What
I
does
have
that
all these
feel
alerts.
like?
It's frustrating. It's like, the Bronx didn't hold the patent to, society's ills and urban decay. Exactly, like we're not the only ones.
So what would you like people to know and see, and if they're coming to New York to visit this summer, what would you like them to do to support the Bronx and see what the Bronx is really about?
Sure. The Bronx is a borough of immigrants. We have the largest Albanian population in the country. We have the largest Garifuna from the Central America community. We have all these people there. So come experiencing authentic food, the culture. If you're coming to New York City and you want to go to Little Italy, do not go downtown because that is not Little Italy. Come to the Bronx. We have the real Little Italy on Arthur Avenue and Belmont. That is the most authentic Little Italy that you're going to see.
And I love pasta and pizza.
So it's perfect. Okay. They have all that there. You have a selection of Albanian restaurants. You have museums like the Bronx Museum of the Arts, which is free, which is very, unique in the city. There's just so many cultural things that are happening. And if you're going to support a business, try to do your research. Make sure you're not supporting a gentrifying business.
So people can get that information about the businesses, the restaurants, the art, the entertainment, the parks, all that wonderful stuff. They can get that at...
Welcome to the Bronx with number 2.
It's right underneath. If you're watching this on YouTube, that's right there.
And on Instagram as well. Welcome to the Bronx. I post a lot of stories and pictures of, the real Bronx.
Yeah.
It's not the Bronx that the Post wants you to believe that it is.
So the real Bronx, meaning the community, the passion, the fun, the music, the food, the entertainment, the spirit that you are helping people to learn about and understand about.
Exactly.
Not just the stereotypes you hear French leaders degrading.
Exactly.
And not a new frontier.
Exactly.
It's not like Star Trek. It's not like they're going where no one has gone before.
Yeah.
There are wonderful people, places, and things there. And I'm really grateful to you for taking time to share all this with me in this tub, as well as with the world in your blog.
Thank you.
And for fighting a good fight. There's some great videos of you debating out there, which are so cool.
It was a pleasure.
Okay.
You did your research.
So if you like this video, please subscribe. Press the red button, subscribe. The more subscribers I get, soon I'll be able to do live streaming. So we'll see if that ever happens. And feel free to share this with a friend. There's so much, I think, challenging news in the media. There's so much that's scary right now in the world, and it's all true, I think. But what I'm learning through these interviews, I've done, I think, in the 50th, is how much good, how much light, how much love, how much passion there is in this world, and how many people are fighting so hard to make this world a better place. And I'm so grateful you're one of them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
All right, everybody. Have a great day. Watch the next episode of Tum Talks. Bye.
Thanks.